what I would like to do now is introduce Dale's very kindly gone from one session to another, and that's a bit of a tall ask. So thank you very much for being willing to do that, Dale. So Dale Vince is the rock star, really, of green energy. So we're really lucky to have our own rock star of green energy here. And Roger Harrabin is formerly of the BBC. And one of the things that you need to do is talk to people who are recently retired. I know that he hasn't hung up his microphone. We're really glad he's here, and I know this is going to be a really interesting chat. Thanks, both of you, for being willing to be with us. Let's have a round of applause.
Thank you very much, Bex. Are you hearing me at the back or not? Yeah? Give me a wave if you can hear me. Give me a wave if you can't hear me. That's the trick question. Bex, can I be a rock star as well? Would it be okay if I'm a rock star as well, just for the session? Would that be all right? Okay, thanks. Look, what I wanted to do in the last session, which was really interesting, was to jump in when the gentleman came to tell us the truth about climate science. I've been following climate science for 35 years, and when I first heard about it, no, maybe 30 years, when I first heard about it, scientists were extremely tentative. They were saying things like, there may be a correlation between rising levels of CO2 and methane, and possibility of rising temperatures, but we're not sure. And they continued in a not sure basis for a very long time. And slowly they became more and more sure. So now there is a vast body of science supporting the theory, which is like a theory like gravity's a theory, that we are warming the planet with our emissions. Now, we didn't ask that gentleman about how else would be explained the consistently rising temperature, which directly matches the rise in CO2 and methane and nitrous oxide, or the disasters that are happening all around the world in terms of wildfires and sea level rise when high temperatures, record temperatures of 50 degrees. I don't need to tell people in this tent that. The evidence is all there. And I did 2 documentary series for Radio 4 called Uncertain Climate, because I was willing to examine the idea that actually we'd got this wrong. And the conclusion was that we had not got this wrong, and that this was a very, very grave threat. Already we've had a temperature rise globally of 1.2, maybe 1.3 Celsius, much higher in the Arctic, for instance. And, we're heading in a direction of probably 2 degrees. Some scientists say 2.5 degrees. Some say, particularly younger scientists, think it's going to be as much as 3 degrees, because just as we're producing more and more renewable energy, at the same time emissions are continuing to rise. Now 3 degrees, if just imagine what we're having recently with 1.2 degrees, just imagine what 3 degrees would look like. I personally don't want that sort of world for my grandchildren. And just another gloss on the nature of the person who clings to the idea that actually it's nothing to do with humans. You get clues from what this gentleman said. One is, I hear from people like Richard Lindzen. There are thousands of scientists on the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, but he can hear from scientists like Richard Lindzen. Well, I interviewed Richard Lindzen as part of my series. He is a brilliant man at MIT. He doesn't believe that smoking causes cancer, and he has got cancer. He's a man, I spoke to Bob May about him. You probably remember Bob May, former government chief scientist, accidentally shared a room with Dick Lindzen when they were at MIT together. And he said that if ever an issue was raised, Dick would say, "No, I agree with you." Or something involving the word no. He just couldn't hear the word. He couldn't hear the word yes. He had to disagree. And this is the guy who is still creating this sort of cloud, and a few others creating this cloud of misinformation on the web. I just thought that ought to be addressed. And the other clue you get there of what he said is these people are commies, right? So generally speaking, the people who are on the climate skeptic side, they're right-wing, libertarian, think that emissions policies will in some way control people, and of course they will. in some ways. So there's an element of truth to it. Anyway, right, that's from the last session hangover. This is the new session. I am with the rock star, that's official, of renewable energy, Dale Vince. Now, can I ask the audience for a show of hands of who thinks they've heard a lot about Dale and how he came into his current situation? A lot or a little? Okay, look, this is about half and half. What I'm going to do is have a few sections to this interview. In the first one, I do want to talk to Dale a little bit about how he got here, because it's an extraordinary journey, and I'm a journalist, I like stories, so his is a great story. And then I want to ask him some questions, and then definitely bring the audience in and ask loads. There's loads of questions that we haven't dealt with in the previous session, and I didn't deal with in my previous session with Dale, which was either last year or possibly the year before. We can't remember because we're too old to have a properly functioning memory. So tell us, Dale, not at great length, but at some length, about how you came here. I mean, particularly I'm thinking of the Traveller's Times and the race around Stonehenge and all that, just absolute madness. Just give people a flavour of that for a couple of minutes.
I will. Hello, everybody. I've been desperate to speak. I've got to say that was hard for me. Before I answer your question, before I go to that, I want to say climate denial should be illegal, because it confuses people, it dilutes action, it puts us off doing what we have to absolutely do. And we spent maybe the first 10 minutes of this session, this hour, talking about climate denial and how it's wrong. We shouldn't be talking about it anymore. We shouldn't allow it. We don't allow the Holocaust to be denied. We shouldn't allow this future Holocaust, the one that's happening right now in front of our eyes, to be denied. I just want to say that.
Okay. In that case, then, I'll just say a little bit more, because the Earth is naturally in balance with CO2 and water vapour, and indeed water vapour is a massive influence, by far the bigger one. But the perturbations are being caused by our emissions of CO2 and methane and nitrous oxide. That's just to finish the science. Now, you're going to tell us about...
Science is undeniable, though. We shouldn't just have a conversation about it anymore.
You're going to talk about your Harley Davidson.
Yeah, no, not really.
Was it a Harley Davidson?
No.
What was it?
You mean my journey?
Yeah, your journey, yeah. And your motorbike?
Oh, my motorbike was a Ducati.
Okay. I never heard of that.
Yeah. You know more about climate science than motorbikes. That's fair.
That is true. Yeah.
So, you want me to talk about my life as a traveller?
Yeah,
that's
briefly.
fine.
You know, in less than half an hour.
I can do brief, Roger.
Yeah, okay, fairly brief.
So I hit the road in the 1980s. I was like roughly 19, 20, something like that. I was about 20 years old probably. And I was disaffected, living in towns and stuff. Didn't want to get a job. Didn't want to be a part of what everybody said you had to do. Get qualifications, get a job, start a career, all that kind of stuff. I dropped out. Went to live on the road. I spent, in the end, a decade, the entire 1980s, living that way, living in a whole bunch of different vehicles, trucks, buses, and stuff like that. I learned how to weld, to fix engines, to build trucks, to build things to live in. I learned all kinds of skills. It was fabulous. In the early 90s, I was part of that thing called the Battle of the Beanfield. I was on my motorbike riding in front of the convoy that was trying to get to Stonehenge, and it was basically smashed up by the same coppers that had been to Orgreave previously and smashed up the miners' demonstrations and stuff like that. That was a hideous event, but and an incredible experience.
What year was that? Because some of these people are a little bit younger than us.
I think it was like early 80s. I always get the year wrong, but I think it's 84. And it was last year we were here talking.
And it was, it was headlines on the television of these incredible scenes of the police chasing these travellers, and then as you say, the battle site where I think a woman was dragged out of a van by the police and beaten with truncheons and stuff. For all of you younger people, it was a funny old time, wasn't it?
It was the most incredible violence and state violence, and it was instigated by Margaret Thatcher. Some years after the Brighton bombing, some private kind of notes of a speech she was going to make. I think I'm resonating a bit. But Margaret Thatcher was going to give a speech at the Brighton conference that was bombed by the IRA, and she was going to say that the unions and the travellers were the biggest threats to our democracy. And I think that shows you why she sent the riot police in to end the traveller movement, which didn't completely achieve, but it was a big deal. On a light note, I was in front of that convoy on my motorbike as an outrider, and I went past a kind of left-hand turn, the last one for about 2 miles, and as I came around a corner, there was a row of tipper trucks had tipped their gravel across this narrow road and blocked it completely, and a sea of riot cops behind them. It was a trap. It was to kettle or bottle the convoy. And I spun my bike around and rode back up the road, and this helicopter began to follow me on this twisty road, and I felt like I was in a James Bond film. I was looking over my head like that. And people back at the convoy listening to police radio, and it came out as a transcript in the subsequent court action. They heard the cops saying, "They've got a motorcycle outrider, stop the motorcycle outrider." And there was me like this. I got back to the convoy just in time before the last left-hand turn, and we went round the roadblock. But I think that probably just increased the level of violence ultimately that happened. Anyway.
Yeah, I was in. We just got a quick gloss on kettles. I was in the first kettle in the UK in Trafalgar Square, reporting on a perfectly peaceful demonstration, a May Day demonstration, and we were in Trafalgar Square, and suddenly I became aware that people, kind of towards the outside of the gathering, were kind of were pushing in, and I couldn't work out why they were pushing in, and eventually it became clear that the police had devised this new tactic of completely surrounding the site and then just forcing people back and back and back and back, till in the end it had gone on for about an hour. There were kids that needed the loo, and there were or people on the demonstration who were just begging to get out, and nobody was allowed to get out, and they just kept squeezing and squeezing and squeezing. It was purely a tactic to intimidate people and stop them demonstrating. And meanwhile, there were other people smashing big windows a short distance away. You got no attention at all because the police were interested in their new technique. Anyway, an interesting digression, I think. So, tell us about the leap from being a motorbike riding outrider hero, James Bond, into the rock star of alternative energy. A short leap, surely.
Yeah, very, very shortly, about 30 years. So I was the end of the 80s, living in a truck with a windmill on the roof, and I, got familiar with wind energy and stuff like that, and liked it. I found myself on a hill outside Stroud, and I saw the first wind farm built in Britain. It was in Delabole in Cornwall, and I had an epiphany. You can only best describe it as that. I thought I could spend another 10 years living this low-impact lifestyle myself, or I could drop back in and try and change the way that electricity was made in our country. I was aware of the climate crisis. I knew that electricity production was the biggest single source of carbon emissions in our country, and I knew about wind energy. I experienced it at a small scale. I saw it at a big scale, and I thought, well, I knew it was a windy hill I lived on because it was powering my trailer. I thought, let's build a big windmill and make a difference that way. So I had that epiphany and spent the first half of the 90s trying to build a windmill there. I had to learn a lot of things about the grid, about finance, about planning. I mean, you name it. Fight a lot of battles. Finally built it in 1996. But just before I built it, I went to see the local power company who were monopoly buyers of energy. If you generated back then, you had to sell it to them. And I said, I want to sell you some green electricity. They laughed at me. They said, what even is it? Who wants it? Here's a rubbish price, because I couldn't sell it to anybody else. But within 12 months, I knew the market was opening up. It was liberalizing so that you could form an energy company yourself. So I left that meeting realizing that's what I had to do. I filled in...
Sorry, just briefly, that was Mrs. Thatcher's influence in liberalizing the energy market. So you owe her.
I owe her. It doesn't mean I like her. But it's a good point. I often say it's the, kind of the one thing I shrug and say was not a bad thing. I think it would have been better, though, if she hadn't privatized the electricity industry and I didn't need to start a green energy company. So anyway, but there it is.
So what's the next step?
Yeah, so I got a form from Ofgem. I think it was like 4 sides of A4 paper, filled it in by hand, and I faxed it. I don't know if you guys know about fax machines, but they were a thing back in the day. I had no money, no experience or anything of the energy industry, and Ofgem gave me a license, and that was really pretty cool. And then we began in 1996, 1st of April, supplied our first customer. We made a new model called Local Supply. We took energy from a landfill site in Gloucester, and we supplied it to a customer in Gloucester, some kind of embedded supply, we called it, because we avoided using the national grid, and we avoided the cost of the national grid. And that was just how we began. Then I built the windmill later in 1996, Friday 13th of December, as it happens, and had already set about looking for more sites to build more windmills, because I didn't at the beginning. I just thought I'll build a windmill, but by the time I was getting ready to build it, I thought I've just got to build more, right? This is a thing, this can happen. And we brought green electricity to the world. We were the first company in the world to actually make that available. And that's how far back all of this story goes.
Brilliant. And where are you now? How many millions are you sitting on?
It depends on.
Are there enough fingers on the hand, or
It depends on.
do we have to go to the toes?
It depends on which newspaper you're reading. But right now, of course, it's become a big issue. We've been hearing about it today. I think Molly and the climate-denying chap, the right-wing press, like to say I'm worth £100 million, but they base that on a valuation of the company Ecotricity that I started and that I own. It's not about what I've got in the bank, and so it's a paper fortune. That's it.
Right, you're right. That's very sad. I hope it
That's not
materialises
sad at all. It's not sad at all, but it's misleading.
I hope it materialises in the form of gold bullion very, very shortly. Now, okay,
Why?
that's the bit which might have been repeated from last year or the year before, if we could remember.
It was last year.
It was last year, he says. I just want to ask a few questions that I'm fairly sure you won't have been asked before, which I asked Caroline Lucas on the Green Party on her valediction. The first question is, what is your favourite animal?
Oh, blimey. I was going to say, I don't think you can find a question I've ever been asked before. No, I have been asked that question. I have.
And the answer is...
You were close. I don't even know. I don't think I have a favourite. I think there are
Do you like animals?
I do. I like lots of animals for lots of different reasons. I like wild animals in particular. And we're involved in a rewilding project in Sussex. We bought 4 pieces of land next to each other. We're pulling them together into a 300-acre lump to rewild. And one of my favourite animals that we're going to bring back there is the beaver.
Yeah, excellent. So that was interesting after all.
I never said it wouldn't be interesting.
What about the windmills' effect on birds, which the Tories talk about a lot? I mean, they do clearly have an impact on birds. Although, having said that, in mid Wales, I went up to see a wind farm, and there was a hobby, a bird of prey, and it just sailed straight towards this turbine. And then somehow, I don't know what happened, it kind of floated on the thermals or something, and it was dancing in and out of the blades as the blades came out. It was awesome. And I'd gone to report about how dangerous they were to birds of prey. So you don't always get what you think. No. But tell me a bit about that, because it's actually a non-trivial issue, and it's very difficult to measure how serious the problem is.
I disagree, actually. I was going to say it's an issue like climate denial. It's just something we don't need to spend a lot of time talking about. We've been building windmills in Britain for 30 years, and the RSPB are a fundamental part of the program of project development. And if you can't be certain, if the RSPB can't be certain that you're building a turbine where it won't affect birds, then you don't get permission. And the actual level of mortality, of bird mortality from turbines is very low.
It's very difficult to tell, though, to get firm numbers, isn't it? I mean, particularly at sea, where they drop into the sea and disappear, or on land where they get eaten by foxes or something.
Yeah, offshore is a different thing. But when we built our first turbine in 1996, it was a big issue. The argument was then that it would kill thousands of birds a year. That's what was said about this turbine. We did a body count, if you can call it that, because we couldn't find any bodies. But for the first couple of years, we checked the site regularly to see if there are any dead birds, and there weren't. And you know, it's just an issue that's not an issue.
Okay, let me ask you another left field question. What's your favourite food?
Well, I'm going to have to say chips.
Are they a good crop potatoes from the point of view of land use and energy efficiency, water efficiency? I don't know anything about spuds.
You know, they're definitely
they
vegan.
Are vegan indeed. Yeah.
I got the wrong T-shirt on today, unfortunately. Yeah. I've got a chips are vegan T-shirt, and it's a real laugh because it makes a serious point, but it's also a laugh. And it came about from my time in football with Big Duncan Ferguson. We signed him as a manager at Forest Green Rovers a couple of years ago, and we were doing a Sky TV interview, and they were putting him on the spot, asking him if he had ever ate vegan food, and he was hesitant. He was a bit like, and I said to him, chips are vegan, and he looked at me and said, chips are vegan. I'm like, yeah, this is live on Sky TV, right? So I got a T-shirt made up. And the point that it makes is that there's a lot of there are a lot of barriers for people if you use the vegan word, and a lot of misconceptions about what it is. Is it a cult? Is it hard to eat anything? But actually, vegan food is all around us, and that's what the T-shirt's for.
Right. Okay. So that was another interesting question. The last one.
You're doing good.
What is your favourite Brexit? Box set.
Box set.
Your favourite box set?
I mean, they're old-fashioned, aren't they? You don't get a box set anymore. You just stream it, don't you?
Yeah. Okay. Your stream set, whatever you want to call it.
Oh.
Is it Breaking Bad or
I watched that one. I did really love it. I'm a fan of the zombie genre, actually. Yeah, absolutely. I love it. I think
really?
It's 'cause, yeah, absolutely.
Why?
Well, I was going to tell you.
Okay, feel free.
Give me a break. Because it's like it's an apocalyptic kind of event, isn't it? And as a kid, I grew up firstly fearing the next ice age. I'd seen a film about it, and I was like moved by the impact that would have on our ability to live on our planet. But one piece of good news from the climate crisis I learned at COP26 is that we've pushed back the next ice age. Right, the periodic shifting of global temperatures has stopped. The next ice age is not coming. So don't go home from here and worry about that. And then as a kid, I was troubled by the Cold War, the idea that any minute now there'd be a siren and, these nukes would fall and stuff like that. And so I guess as a kid, I'd been concerned about apocalyptic events. I was concerned about sustainability as well. And the zombie genre is just fun because you can explore all kinds of what happens if society breaks down and that kind of stuff, And I know I like zombie films.
And what does happen if society breaks down? I mean, actually, I'll go serious now because I have a son who I've just been to the Euros with, and for 10 days he's an economist. Well, Dad, you talk about all this land being lost to grow food, which could be growing food on, but actually look at the frozen wastes in Canada and Siberia, and what about that? And I want to see the equations. I mean, where does that lead to in terms of where we're going with zombies and apocalypse if we can't be sure about exactly what's going to happen? We can see some places are going to be too hot, but...
Well, I think we know what we need to do. We need to transition rapidly to green energy on the grid. We need to electrify transport, and we need to change what we eat. We have to stop eating animals. If we do those things, we solve the climate crisis, or at least stop it in its tracks. We have to take carbon out of the atmosphere to actually unwind it, but that will come next. And we'll solve the global wildlife crisis, the sixth great extinction event on our Earth. We'll solve the human health crisis because of what we're eating, and free up just mad amounts of land that nature can have, which is part of solving the wildlife crisis, I've got to say. But there are three crises affecting us, right? There's the climate crisis, the human health crisis, and the wildlife crisis. We can solve them all by stopping fossil fuels and stopping eating animals.
And how you... Well, there's quite a lot of... Put up your hand if you're a vegetarian. Leave it up if you're vegan. Quite a lot. Right, quite a lot. So how do we persuade people? I mean, these people, most of them are already persuaded, but I think probably the most difficult thing in terms of climate change as we move forward is persuading people to come with those who want to make the changes. How do you do it?
I think we have to do it by information and persuasion. We have to show people what the problems are and show them what they can do about it, and also appeal to them personally. So, for example, in the diet debate, we have to show people that an animal-based diet is bad for them. They'll live longer, higher quality lives if they don't eat animals. And also part of that argument is that this isn't natural. The diet we have today is not natural. If you go back just to the end of the Second World War, or just a little bit after, before the invention of industrial agriculture, the amount of meat and dairy in our diets was relatively small. So track it on a graph, that's gone up. Nature's gone down. We know why, because we've been taking all of the land for nature to grow plants, to feed animals, to feed us, and we get diminishing returns from that. That kind of argument, really, we can bring nature back if we change our diet. We can make ourselves healthier if we change our diet, and we can fight the climate crisis.
Yeah, I mean, you're kind of winning, but very, very slowly, rather too slowly in terms of the number of people who are actually transferring to vegetarian or vegan diets. I mean, the political parties won't talk about it. They are too scared. And that, bring back Mr. Very Large anti-communist man. I mean, he doesn't look like the sort of man who will be persuaded to stop eating steak.
Yeah. I wanted to say first off, I think winning slowly is the best way to win sometimes, because it's the most enduring way to win. If you win quickly, maybe it's not such a secure win.
Yep.
Red meat consumption has gone down in our country by 30% in the last 10 years. People are getting the message. The World Health Organization lists bacon alongside tobacco on the top list of carcinogenic substances. Tobacco, you can't brand it. If you buy it in packets, it's got hideous pictures of diseased organs on it. It lives behind shutters in shops. That's tobacco. Bacon sits in a fridge in a supermarket, probably with a picture of a happy pig on it or something like that. So I think there's an easy win here for government just to say, well, look, this is the science, right? Bacon is bad for people, just like tobacco is on a par with tobacco. So let's label it. Let's put health warnings on these products and stuff like that. You're right that right now political parties don't want to talk about it, but
do you think they would after the election? Do you see anybody breaking cover? I mean, even backbenchers won't talk about it.
I'm just so hideously optimistic that I'm going to say yes. I really think so.
Okay, for the last left field question, because the others have been so fruitful, I've had it.
Have you got any right field questions?
Well, they're coming up, but they'll be relatively boring. Sorry, I didn't
Based
mean
on
that. That was
conspiracy
just a joke. They won't be boring at all. It'll be very interesting. Favourite beer?
I'm going to say lager, and right now I'm going to say
Isn't that a bit anti-British?
Japanese lager. That's even more so.
Is it?
But I think they brew it here anyway.
What's
I
wrong
like
with
bitter.
the good old
I like
West
bitter.
Country bitter on that?
I like bitter. You said favourite, and I'm just going to tell you, I think it's lager.
Right. Well,
Doesn't mean I don't drink bitter.
do people approve of that or not? Should he be drinking lager? What do we think? Put up your hand if you think you should transfer to beer. Like proper English beer. No hands going, my God, what sort of a place is this? Glastonbury.
You've lost the audience, Roger.
Glastonbury, you've failed me. Right, let's go along to some more serious things now. I am going to pick up questions later on. I really do want to hear from people. Let's talk a bit about the election. We've kind of talked about it a bit already, but talk a bit more about it. You have become, thanks to this election, a majorly controversial figure. Can you explain what happened and why?
Well, I think it probably started last summer. I think it was last summer, the summer of Just Stop Oil, I like to call it, because I think the organisation, their impact was at its peak, the disruptive protests and all that kind of stuff. I funded them from inception, actually. I believe in the mission. It's a very simple ask, it's a very simple, logical one. That, I mean, I'm just not going to say any more about that because it's too right to be true. And I went on a march around Parliament Square with them. I gave a response to the Daily Mail, who'd been kind of slagging me off for that and supporting Labour, and it looked like this. And I did it on camera to the Daily Mail, and you know, just became a little bit controversial for that. Then realised that these protests weren't changing the direction of the government in the right way. They were actually pushing them further into the further licensings of oil and gas. Rishi Sunak saw it as an electoral opportunity. He called me an eco-zealot. The Sun called me an eco-yob. And they tried to link Labour to Just Stop Oil via me because I gave money to both organisations. So that's how that came about. I realised that they were using it as a weapon to get to Labour, and I took it away from them by stopping funding Just Stop Oil. Also because it wasn't working, it was counterproductive, and I declared that what we had to do was actually just stop the Tories. That's how we stop oil at this next election, and yeah. So that made me a little bit infamous, I would say.
Yeah, I mean, I was being hammered for probably 3 to 4 years, and still get a little bit of kick from right-wing commentators, particularly the Daily Telegraph, who would actually write stuff about me. Like, there was a 1,000-word feature from Charles Moore about me personally, because I was also an eco-zealot. The phrase one of them used was, I just want to get it right, was the high priest of global Gaian worship. That was what I was on the BBC. So, you know, I do have some sympathy about this. And I've got a very thick skin, so mostly I didn't care. But when Charles Moore wrote 3 pieces 3 weeks in a row, I thought it was getting a bit much. So I came up with this brilliant wheeze where he'd to slag me off in the Telegraph, and then by chance, complete chance, there was an opportunity came to subtly get my own back the following week. And there was an article about a report about conspicuous consumption, and I got on the Today program, got a slot on the Today program to talk about it. And my ploy was like this: well, Justin, you know what this report is saying is, these are my words, not the report's words. This report is saying we've just got to stop being greedy, Mr. Moore, and be frugal, Mrs. Less. Anyway, I was really pleased with myself for that, for at least 3 days. And then I thought about it, and I thought, actually, it was a bit cheap and a bit silly, and only 2 people would get it, or that would have been fun. And so I took him, or I phoned up the head of climate science at the Royal Society, Professor Sir Brian Hoskins, and said, would you please invite the 3 of us for lunch so we can have a chat with this man, because he clearly knows nothing. And so Brian met us there, and I went down with Charles Moore. He's got his sort of trousers come up to here, and braces and polished brogues, and I mean, he's straight out of the 1930s, I think. During the chat over lunch, he suddenly said to Brian, Professor Sir Brian Hoskins,
Oh, well, 50 degrees. I mean, that does sound a lot, but I mean, people will be able to get on perfectly well. And Brian, who's a very, very calm and mild-mannered man, leant forward over the table and said, "Do you not understand? 50 degrees. Nobody can work outside. Crops shrivel, roads melt." Anyway, Charles Moore kind of recoiled in his chair. And he said, "Oh yes, I can see. I need to learn a bit more about this climate change stuff." Anyway, I was really pleased. And next week he wrote a column slagging me off again. Anyway, I just wonder. I mean, as I say, I've got a thick skin. It did get to me sometimes. My wife's in the front row and she's nodding. It did get to me sometimes. Does it get to you?
No.
No, really, not at all.
No, I take it as a sign that I'm winning. I'm achieving something. So Rishi Sunak first called me an eco-zealot when he was in Washington visiting the U.S. government, and he took time out to call me names. I thought, wow, fair play. You know, a couple of weeks ago, we can bring it all back to Stonehenge and Just Stop Oil here. It was a couple of weeks ago, Just Stop Oil threw some hideously damaging cornflower on Stonehenge. You know, everybody wet themselves over it on both sides of politics and obviously the media. And Rishi Sunak said a certain Labour donor should condemn this, right? Meaning me. The whole media knew who he meant. They were all saying, "Oh, he means Dale Vince." So I went on social media and said, "Look, Rishi, since you've asked me personally to respond, I don't support what happened. And that's for a different reason other than damage, right? It's just cornflower." I said, but the actual real damage is being done to the stones, the real irreversible and super big damage is being done is by this tunnel that this government have consented under the stones against the advice of planning inspectors. And now we see the UN wading in and saying Stonehenge is going to go on the danger list. You know, it's a nationally important, globally important monument, as Rishi Sunak said. And he's such a fucking hypocrite for complaining about some cornflower when he's overridden planning objections to allow this 3-kilometre tunnel, right, which is so unimportant. So that was it. So no, I don't mind it.
I think the thing is that the parts of the media are hyper vigilant about any opportunity to undermine people's belief in environmental protest. I think that's part of the problem. And we're seeing these two things happening. You know, the victories in the courts in various ways, but still the police and the authorities trying to find new ways to clamp down. I mean, how do you see it progressing?
I see the end of Tory rule, and then hopefully we'll see some correction of these these clampdown policies that they brought in lately. It was only last week.
Would Labour rescind them? Do you think?
I don't speak for Labour, but I would hope.
I just wondered what your opinion was.
Yeah, I was about to tell you.
Again.
I would.
Still reminded me from last time.
I would hope they would. I simply would hope they would, because it seems common sense to me that these laws are draconian. That they're intended to intimidate people and to make it super painful to exercise our right to simple, peaceful protest. And I was just going to say, I think it was only last week that some protests, I don't know if they were Just Stop Oil or what they were cleared by a jury of something, and
breaking windows.
Was it? Yeah, brilliant. And I think that's fabulous. And the government have really been angry about the extent to which our judicial system is letting them down by not finding activists guilty. And they even caused changes such that judges have said it's contempt of court if in your defense you try to cite the climate crisis to justify your actions, which I think is the most obscene anti-democratic thing that perhaps this government have done.
Let me ask you a question on your home turf, your home patch. Labour are planning to, in after this coming election, if they are to be elected, of course, they're planning to base their faith on renewables, of course, hydrogen, nuclear, marine. Which of those do you actually favour, or would you go along with all four?
I think that I wouldn't build any new nuclear power stations. They don't make any sense. There's the most expensive electricity we've ever seen, and they just take so long to build. They always come in at least a decade late and billions over budget, like Hinkley. But I think we should probably see Hinkley through because so much has been spent on it, but not Sizewell C. We should draw the line there. In terms of marine technology, I think tidal lagoons have a lot to offer us as a country, potentially, so I'm in favor of that. Tidal stream seems to be working, but it's very expensive. Tidal lagoons could be super cheap, could be the cheapest form of energy we've known, and predictable, because we can predict the tides 100 years in advance, and they sweep up and down our country on the west coast. So that a series of these projects could actually give us almost baseload power. We can hold the water for a couple of hours and release it on demand, giving us controllability of renewables as well. So I'm in favor of that. But the big win right now is onshore wind and solar. We can just get after that. We can get to 100% by 2030. What was the fourth one?
That was carbon capture and storage they were talking about.
I think that's bullshit.
Okay.
It just is. It's not working anywhere in the world at scale economically, and it won't. It's just an excuse from the oil and gas companies to carry on doing what they're doing.
I'm sure I completely agree with you, but if you look back to the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, their report before last, their sort of optimistic case was that we would be able to succeed in cutting emissions if we use carbon capture and storage, and then later, if we use direct air capture, where we actually suck CO2 out of the atmosphere. Those two technologies were pretty central to their prognosis.
That's worrying then. We do direct air capture in one of our enterprises. We make diamonds from atmospheric carbon, and we know how expensive and difficult it is to do that. We turn atmospheric carbon into diamonds, by the way, is what I'm saying. We call them sky diamonds. I conceived of the idea because...
Is this a plug?
No.
No, not a plug. Don't buy them.
No, don't buy them.
No.
They're good for the environment, but hideously expensive. And I came up with the idea because I thought that, I was thinking about geoengineering the planet, this idea that we do big things to change, big systems. And there are lots of different ways to do it, but it occurred to me that it's only half the job. We get the carbon out of the atmosphere. We've got to lock it up in a really permanent form. And I thought, well, diamonds are the hardest form of carbon that we know about, right? Wouldn't it be amazing if we could do that? It took like a 5 to 7 year R&D journey to do that. And at the beginning, I thought it was a carbon capture and storage technology. Turns out the amount of carbon in a single carat of diamond is relatively small, and the cost, of course, of a diamond is relatively high, and the cost of making them in our case as well. So it's a brilliant way for us to have diamonds without having environment impact. Our diamonds are carbon negative, and so we've added it to the list of things we say we can have in another way. We don't have to give them up, like burgers, cars, football, energy, obviously all them kinds of stuff. Now diamonds as well. And flying, actually. We launched an electric airline last year. So all of the things we need, we can have. The technology will allow us to do it. But this, I think I'm off track here. Carbon capture and storage, we've done direct air capture. We know that it's really expensive, and I'm not sure it'll ever be possible at the kind of scale we need, at the kind of price we can afford.
And yeah, I quite agree with you, especially as we can't avoid carbon capture and storage. How on earth are we going to afford direct air capture where the concentrations of CO2 so very much lower? But I want to ask you about storage, because I'm a little bit obsessed with storage of energy recently, because I see the government, this current government and the probable future government talking about those things, the hydrogen, the carbon capture and storage, which is a different sort of storage. But I've been writing recently about different sorts of storage which are not getting mentioned. For instance, molten salt. You can take surplus energy from renewables, the sun, during a hot day, or the wind during a windy night, and you can actually heat with using that energy. You can heat salt till the salt melts, and then the next day you can run the salt heat through a system to drive a turbine. And keep your heating going that way. There's lots of things I've looked at. I'm looking at for new scientists at new ways, and that you can rust iron and then de-rust it and produce an electrical current in the process. You can use piles of bricks to heat, literally piles of bricks, to heat the bricks like in an old storage heater, and use them for an industrial site, the heat from them for an industrial site next day. Now, I don't hear any politicians talking about this stuff. I hear them talking about hideously expensive hydrogen, which we will need, but they seem to, the hydrogen lobby, which is the coal and gas lobby, appear to have captured the narrative and pushed these other younger technologies out of the way. What do you think?
Well, all these emerging technologies are really interesting. I think battery technology itself has moved on so far. You know, I was here at Glastonbury in the late 80s, early 90s with old train batteries powering things and thinking, wouldn't it be great if we could power the whole festival with batteries and little windmills and stuff like that? That battery tech was rubbish. 10 years later, we thought, wouldn't it be great if we could make a battery that would work in the house and take it on and off the grid when the peaks and troughs came and that kind of stuff. The battery technology back then couldn't do it. But if you fast forward to today, the battery technology is here. And one thing I was suggesting earlier, Roger, is that Great British Energy, Labour's flagship scheme, could actually fund and own and control a national program for installing energy efficiency, solar rooftops and batteries. And if we were to install just 3 million homes this way with batteries and all that other kind of stuff, we could knock gas power stations off the grid. They do a job at the moment of diving in when there's a peak of demand. But this combination of batteries and solar on the house, we could do away with gas in the balancing of our national grid. And we can go much further, of course, than 3 million homes, and we should do. This is about bringing energy independence down to the home level. And I don't think we need a new battery technology in the same way that well, they'll come and they'll get better and better, and I think that's great. But in the same way, hydrogen is an answer looking for a problem, is how I see it. You know, it's not got a role in cars, for example, which a lot of people argued for a long time. It might have a role. It has limited roles. Our airline will use hydrogen through a fuel cell to make electricity, for example. So there's an awful lot to say in a short amount of time. I saw you looking at your watch.
I'm going to come to some questions and answers, but just another chance for a little anecdote. We journalists are storytellers, so we like telling stories. Many years ago, I went for Newsnight. Good grief. I went for Newsnight to the west coast of America, where they were building what they called the Hydrogen Highway. It was being pushed by George W. Bush to using hydrogen in cars and having hydrogen filling stations where there would previously have been petrol. And I went very positively because it had been so hyped. And then I got to California and I spent a few days there, and I thought, actually, this isn't going to work. There's a competition here between electricity to run cars and hydrogen. And for a whole suite of reasons, I didn't think hydrogen would win. I thought it would lose. Anyway, I came back, I did my report, and then some months later I was invited bizarrely by Lord Brown, then head of BP, to dinner with him at the Royal Geological Society. And I turned up, very good, nice, black tie dinner, very fancy and what have you. I was sitting next to him. We'd both drunk quite a lot, and I took my opportunity towards the end of the meal to say, I've just been to California to see the hydrogen electric contest. I reckon that you guys have just hyped hydrogen as a way of keeping hold of the energy supply infrastructure. Am I right? And he said, yes. I thought, what? I said, would you say that to my microphone? And he smiled at me and he said, could you pass the port? Now, I'm going to take some questions and answers. So this man here just caught my eye, followed by the person behind in the white jacket. Shall I just shout? No, we're giving you a microphone. And please do say what your name is and if you're affiliated to anyone or anything or any party or what your favourite animal is.
My name's Alan and I'm affiliated to all the vegans in the world. Dale, food production, you've mentioned, big eco issue, right? A lot of people do care about how the food is produced, but they're confused by all the information that's put out there. One of the confusing bits of information out there right now is choose regenerative meat. Choose sustainably produced regenerative meat. Why? I can tell from your face you don't like it. Why don't you like it? And do you have any plans in the future to get into food production?
Okay, let me just add a little bit to that. Do you think there is such a thing as regenerative farming?
I think it's a new term. It's kind of like marketing led. I think of it as bullshit. I think it's like a.
Well, it is bullshit partly.
Yeah, I think it's like
and cow shit and other shit.
I think it's a refuge for people that know that we have to stop eating animals, but can't bring themselves to reconcile with it. They actually have to stop eating animals. I think the amount of animals we can grow in that way is extremely limited, and that's why we have industrial farming. We have to do it the way we do to make the quantities that people eat. So if it has a future, it's as a niche supplier, a very expensive niche for people that just don't want to give up meat. Am I going to get involved in food production? Yes, we already have. We've begun a program based in a lab at the moment in a university. We're looking to take protein from grass. In fact, we've done it. We cracked it a couple of months ago. It's an interesting kind of genesis for this idea, because like for years and years I've been having these discussions about veganism and that kind of stuff, and get past all the arguments that you might typically find, and a fallback is often, but we can't eat grass, therefore we might as well let animals eat it and eat the animals. Now, my argument to that would have normally been, well, we don't have to do something with that land, we can let nature have it. But it's part of what spurred me to look at grass as a food source and think, well, why can't we actually eat grass? We found a way, it's an organic process, to take protein from grass and turn it into powder or granules like soya or wheat protein or whatever, all the ones we're familiar with. We can do it twice as effectively as a cow can, and there are 100 million tons of grass grown in our country at the moment and fed to animals, and if we took that and used our process on it, we could make twice as much protein as the whole country eats every year. So we could be a protein superpower as well as an energy one.
But would that work? A lot of land you wouldn't be able to actually harvest the grass on the uplands in particular. Cows can harvest it, but I suspect humans can't.
What I quoted was the 100 million tons that's grown and fed to cows, fed to animals. So it's harvested and taken to them in factory farms and that kind of stuff. So I don't think that's a problem.
Right, okay, so the person behind the white jacket, please say your name and where you're from.
Hello, I'm Francis, and I'm from Stroud, so I just wanted to say hi.
Okay, thank you very much. Anyone else?
No, that's not all. I also very
You said just wanted to say hi.
No, well, I wanted to say hello to a fellow Stroudie and to talk about carbon sequestration that the Earth does for itself, particularly in the oceans and in places like salt marshes and peat bogs. Shouldn't a lot of our energy in education be towards trying to improve or to give the Earth the chance to do this for us, which is much better than us trying to wade in with yet more technology? We might even have, as usual, unlooked for results.
Yeah, no, I agree. Yeah. I agree completely. And one of the great upsides of rewilding, if we let land go wild and back to nature, is it becomes a carbon sink, which is a great additional benefit to the restoration of wildlife. And there's a thing called seagrass. You've probably all heard of it. We've lost about 90% of our seagrass around our coast, and I think it has the capacity to absorb 30 times the CO2 than rainforest does. And one thing that we could do is help to bring that back. That would be our intervention, but bringing back a natural thing, and it could be a great way to absorb carbon and create habitats around our coast again.
Thank you. So let me go to somewhere where I don't normally look. I don't normally look there, so the woman with the gold thingy.
Hello, my name's Jess. Hi, Dale. I'm a presenter and I'm a co-founder of environmental business Carbon Jacked. Very important question. Where is the party you're holding on the 4th of July? And are we all invited?
And when does
don't answer.
And when does it finish?
When does it finish?
It could be a long one.
Not for about a decade, I
Let me
hope.
take another question or answer from over there. So the man in the front.
Hi, Dale.
Okay, somebody else has seized it. That's fine. It says there is an 18-month-old about to address the congregation.
What's your question? What's your question? He's going to eat it.
He's going to eat it. Okay, fine.
We'd love to know your opinion on HS2 and the likelihood of it potentially being cancelled, the rest of it.
I have no idea. Actually, my opinion on HS2 is it should never have gone ahead, and we've lost some ancient trees and stuff like that in this, this hideous project. Well, over £100 billion. I mean, what could we do with that money? I'll tell you what we could do. For a fraction of it, we could build all of this infrastructure to harness enough wind and sun to power ourselves entirely from green electricity. We could, insulate ourselves from more global price shocks and high bills and shit like that for a fraction of that HS2 budget. I think it's mad.
Yeah, you've got to think of the carbon budget as well. All the embodied carbon in the cement for HS2 will not be paid back in terms of a carbon debt for 100 years. That's according to HS2's own figures. Right. The media has been really slack on this. Really, really slack. Wow. So, person there with orange, I think.
Everything's pink in here.
Is it pink? Oh, it might be pink. Is it orange or pink?
It is orange. It is orange.
Oh, the tent is pink. Yes, it's distorting
the
colours. That's the problem.
Hi, my name is Michael Joyce. I work for a reusable plastic packaging company. I just wanted to ask, with the election coming up next week, with the likely party to win, what one policy would you like to see enacted? Thank you.
I think the one they're promised, 100% green energy by 2030. I think they'll have to move heaven and earth, uproot trees to make this happen, not literally, metaphorically. Make big changes to the planning system, not just for the windmills and the solar projects, but also for the grid. And I think oblige grid companies to invest in the grid that we need, in the way that we need to oblige water companies to fix the infrastructure before they have any more dividends. I would take the same line with National Grid and the local grid operators. I would say you've got to build the stuff we need before you can have more dividends, because we license them, we effectively control them. But I think they've really got to move heaven and earth to hit this target.
I have to say, I was standing in a queue with a man from the Treasury this morning. I'm just checking he's not here. I'm not going to mention him by name, but he said, yes, we can see, when Labour come into power that, there's going to be good opportunities to develop the economy through clean technology and what have you. But this 2030 thing, it won't fly. I mean, you've got to be prudent and, 2030 is impossible. So Labour do have a task ahead of them if they can't get support from their own Treasury.
Yeah.
Is that, okay, fine, okay. This is possibly the last question. Somebody give me a time check.
Hello, John Fryer from energy industry, festival industry, professional football industry, and veganism. So I've been looking forward to meeting you for a while. Focusing on the festival industry, we do a lot of these climate gatherings and a lot of conversations, and then we're out there with quite a dirty fuel mix in the festival industry and the transportation and stuff. I heard a rumour some years ago you were possibly getting involved with Boomtown to help them improve their fuel mix. It might not be true, but I just wondered right now, with where you're currently at in your life, what more the industry can do to improve its relationship to climate.
Cool. Well, look, that's a true rumour. I started a company along with Claire, sits in the audience there, called Grid Fairies recently, and the idea is to try and get festivals and live events, music and sporting, off of diesel. There's a hideous amount of diesel burn this weekend, for example, and at BST in London, central London, they'll be burning just an unbelievable amount of diesel. Anyway, basically it's about batteries, dropping them in to reduce the load on fuel, but also to try and bring grid in where you can, because some of these events like Hyde Park, central London, why not just put the grid in, right? There's an event there every year. Glastonbury, there's an event here every year. Why not put the grid in, that kind of stuff? So we're looking at where we can bring grid to festivals, and where it's difficult to afford, we've got a third leg of our approach, which is to build a solar project nearby to help pay for the grid and then throw a cable over the fence into the gig. Here at Glastonbury, we've just brought the biggest battery that's ever been used. It's a 1 megawatt, 3 megawatt hour capacity. It's running the Arcadia field entirely for the weekend, so there'll be no diesel burnt up there. We're off to Weymouth with it in a couple of weeks' time, and then we're going to Bristol to power the Massive Attack gig completely. That gig will have no generators on it at all, and it'll be all plant-based food, which is pretty exciting. I think festivals are they're fun. We all love to go to them, but they affect how people look at life. People come to festivals, they get ideas about how they could do things differently, and we've got to show that we don't have to burn fossil fuels, we don't have to eat animals, we can still have fun, we can still party.
Okay, is Molly Scott Cato in the audience? If she's not, I'm going to put her point of view. Molly Scott Cato, am I distorting? Yes. Molly Scott Cato, long-term. Can you hear me at the back or not? I'm distorting heavily here. Molly Scott Cato, long-term Green Party stalwart, was complaining to me that you have embraced Labour so fully that you are actually trying to push the Greens out of places where they're doing quite well and persuade them not to stand there, and that the Labour Party's manifesto, actually, you apparently, I haven't heard of this, but you apparently have called it green. It isn't. It definitely isn't green. For instance, there was a checklist put out by Green groups we're asking about 40 different policy areas. The Greens scored on all of them but one. The Tories scored on just 5. And Labour still only scored on 20. So there's only on half of them that Labour scored. And they very judged by Molly and others to be very slack on nature. Only 2 paragraphs in the manifesto, for instance. What do you think about all those things?
I think that 4 times better than the Tories is good. I think that we shouldn't let perfect be the enemy of good in this election. I think that Labour's manifesto is green. the 100% by 2030 is a fucking ambitious green target, actually. The Tories say it will cause blackouts, and the Greens say it's not good enough. The truth is in the middle. It's super ambitious, and if we achieve it, that'll be a really big thing. So that's my answer.
And what about the nature stuff? Sorry, there's very little on the oceans in terms of Labour policy on natural wood and national areas, peatlands. There's loads of stuff not touched on just because of the central focus on energy.
Yeah, and I think it's a very small manifesto, relatively speaking. I think you've got to bear in mind that Labour need to win this election against a typically hostile media, which is a big obstacle for any Labour government to win against. I think they've probably kept a lot of powder dry in terms of what they're going to do. They're focused on the cost of living and energy and stuff like that. I just don't think that we can judge this next administration based on what's in the manifesto only. I've got a lot of hope and belief that Labour get the bigger issues, but they just haven't put them in the manifesto in order to keep a focus. And, the alternative to Labour is another Tory administration, which is unthinkable. And these are our real choices, Labour or the Tories. Green is not a realistic choice at this election, a Green government. But we can get a Green government, in my opinion, if we get a Labour government. And it's an historic opportunity. I want to say this as well, right? We're halfway through the last decade. The UN said we had to act to keep global temperatures down. We spaffed the first half up the wall with Johnson, Truss and Sunak. We can't afford to do it with the second half. We have the technology we need. It's super economic. It's how we get economic growth and jobs. It's how we reach millions of people with that economic argument that we need to transition to green. This is our historic opportunity. The Tories have had enough rope in 14 years to hang themselves, and they've done a really good job of it. The country are about to kick them out. We should embrace the Labour government and then get behind them and drive this transition.
Let me ask the audience about that. Can you show of hands from that point of view? Show of hands thinking that actually the green issues have been neglected by Labour and one should cling to the Green Party. Gentleman, lady. that. Yeah, okay, so this is an allegation I heard earlier that you had tried to persuade the candidate for Bristol Central not to stand. Is that true? And if so, is it reputable?
No, that's not true. I didn't try to persuade a candidate not to stand. I just shared my opinion in Bristol. I went to support the Labour candidate, shared my opinion that actually we can't be sure of the outcome of this election. The Tories are talking up a supermajority, and that's designed to encourage people that want Labour to win to stay at home and to encourage people that won't turn out for the Tories to actually turn out by scaring them with talk of blank checks and stuff like that. The outcome is far from certain. Voter ID is the new voter suppression legislation from this administration. That will have an unknown impact. In the first by-election under which it was run, 3,000 people were not allowed to vote. That's, if it translated nationally, that's 5% of the electorate not allowed to vote. Most of them probably wouldn't vote Tory. They know what they're doing. There's so much uncertainty in this election. It's just not a risk I'm prepared to take.
Right, okay. One last question. Actually, the guy in front has actually got the microphone, so I think it probably is going to go to him suddenly.
Thank you. I'm Beryl. I'm a climate activist from Bristol. We spoke about grass earlier, and I just wanted to ask Dale a question about heat pumps. New builds, we can put heat pumps in them, and well-insulated homes are suited for heat pumps. But what about all the other old housing stock? What solutions do we have for them?
Oh, thanks, Verl. I just want to say, Verl and I work together, and we have a very different view on this Green Labour issue, and I thought he was going to hit me with a question about that. but I appreciate the heat pump question.
How many
instead.
other stooges are there in the audience? Put up your hand if you work for Dale in any way. Yeah, there's a few hands going up.
So, look, it's a great question because the orthodoxy currently is that we need a national heat pump program to decarbonize home heating, and it's the toughest nut to crack. How do we get like 80% of our houses off of the mains gas? It's a Johnson plan. You have to put inverted commas around that because it wasn't worked out or costed at all. And it turns out when we did some studies, 20% of British homes can never have a heat pump. Another 20% need major intervention before it will work. Everybody that has a heat pump will see bills that are nearly 50% higher just because of the basic physics. The whole program will cost about £300 billion, which is what we spent in the pandemic. And there are all kinds of other knock-on smaller problems, I'm going to say. The alternative we have is to make gas from grass. That'll cost about £50 billion, so 1/6 of the cost. And we don't have to change anything. So if you have a heat pump program, we throw away tens of millions of appliances, boilers and cookers. We have to intervene in home heating with different radiators and that kind of stuff. It's an incredibly environmentally, economically wasteful project. If we just make green gas from grass, We just change the gas that we put into the grid. Everything else stays the same. No intervention, no cost. We can create 160,000 jobs in the rural economy and provide a transition for farmers into this green economy. And more, I think I'm running out of time.
I just have to say, I can't leave you with that thought in the air, because I have looked at the potential to energy from grass, and I can't find anybody supporting your viewpoint. Do I have to wait a while, or
Yes,
is it just because it's not a good idea?
You have to wait a while. In my experience, it might take 10 years. It might not. It might take 5. But I've been here before. So it's a normal experience for me. Eventually we'll win. We built the first green gas mill already last summer, and we've done the studies that show there's enough grass to make enough gas to power all of our homes, and the economics are on our side, and we'll win this argument.
Yeah, but making money out of grass, I mean, it's like making money out of the wind. It'll never happen, will it?
That's exactly right.
All right, thank you very much. Dale Vince.
Hey, big hand please, Roger Harrabin and Dale Vince.